Welcome, ladies and gentlemen.
APGOV.
Whoa. So weird. Welcome, guys. We're going to go ahead and get started with Chapter 2.
Chapter 2.
We're just going to do the first half in this video, but just get excited. Constitution. I love it.
Oh, it's the best.
Let's do it.
Also flawed.
Flawed, but that's okay.
It's okay.
We're working on it. Learning objectives, we're just going to do the first 4 here. We're going to talk about the Revolution, the Articles of Confederation, the Constitutional Convention, and then some of the issues that were surrounding the Constitutional Convention. And these will be covered in the second video. Okay, goodbye. All right, first one. Go for it.
This is just kind of a breakdown of what we'll go through. So, again, the road to revolution. So what kind of led up to the American Revolution. After the Revolution, declaring our independence, kind of bringing in the idea of, the colonists brought in ideas from England, so English heritage, American creed, winning independence, and then the conservative revolution.
Okay. Go for it.
Okay.
So
leading up to the Revolution, life was not terrible in the colonies. I mean, it was a struggle, but they were making their way. Except for the fact that slavery was prevalent. However, each colony was essentially self-governing. So it wasn't as if they looked at each other as like united in any way as one country yet. They were still very independent. They were very self-governing. Every single colony had their own government. Heavy taxes were put on the colonists to help finance the French and Indian War, which was going on at the time. And the governing bodies kind of started enforcing trade regulations. And colonists started to get kind of angry that there was no representation for them in the English Parliament, even though they were paying these taxes and they were following the English rule, et cetera, et cetera. This kind of led to boycotts and protests. Very American of them.
How American?
And again, it led to the First Continental Congress, which happened in Philadelphia, and that was in September of 1774. And that's where delegates kind of got together to just initiate talks of where do we go from here? What is our next step? Do we stay with England? Do we break away? We need to kind of hash this out.
And again, like this really quick note here, Boston Tea Party, really fancy name for a riot.
That's right.
You know, that's very American of us to like put a fancy name. Oh, it was a tea party.
It was a tea party.
It was so nice.
Ooh, tea.
we rioted.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So declaring independence, obviously you guys have known this, Thomas Jefferson, what should we do? And at the end of the day, we get all these Enlightenment ideas you guys learned about in world history theoretically, and Thomas Jefferson was really big on that. He was really big on follower of John Locke, which he believed that if a government was not serving the people, then the people had the right to overthrow said government. So in this case, they elected to revolt, and Thomas Paine's common sense also it fanned the revolutionary sentiments by really helping people to understand why the things that were happening and like the transgressions of King George and the English government were really bad, and we'll get it more into the conservative revolution in a little bit, but like the idea is really that people are, I mean. At the end of the day, there were wealthy white people, and they wanted to keep their wealth. And that's part of the reason why they were so upset, because they were standing to lose money from continuing to stay with Britain. There's common sense for you.
So common sense, guys, just really quick, is it was almost like a pamphlet of information that was widely distributed throughout the colonies, and it was written by a guy named Thomas Paine. And in it, as Mr. Shaw just said, it was just, here's what King George has been doing. Here is what is wrong about all those things. And here's why we need to collectively come together and break away from that for the betterment of everybody here in the colonies.
And like he explained it in such a way that was really easy for people to understand, I think it was one of the most widely distributed pamphlets ever in American history. So there you go.
Cool.
And again, I already kind of talked about this. So again, we know Thomas Jefferson wrote the Declaration of Independence. The Declaration is your first foundational document.
Woo!
So you guys are going to need to know that like the back of your hand. Really, though, just listen to any Taylor Swift song and you'll be good to go. What? It's a breakup letter.
It's like a breakup song.
It's a breakup song.
Breakup letter.
But back in the day.
Right. Taylor Swift
think
is
it worked.
modern day Thomas Jefferson.
Wow. Write that down. That is good. Anyway, so it was the justification for revolution. It was the breakup letter. Here's why we want to break up. Okay, it's not me. It's definitely you. Let's get rid of it. And again, the revolutionaries needed foreign assistance, and that's part of the reason why they wrote the Declaration so that they could send it out specifically to France because they really needed France's help to win this thing.
Because think about it, France and England at the time are not friends. So these American colonists are going, okay, if we can get France on our side, we can get some resources, some money, surely we'll have a shot.
It's kind of like Taylor Swift and Katy Perry's feud. All right, I'm just kidding. I'm kidding. I'm totally kidding.
Okay, so going back to Mr. Shaw touched on this, but the framers of these foundational documents, so the Declaration of Independence and then later the Constitution, they subscribe to these ideas that John Locke has come up with. And John Locke was an English philosopher, which you guys learned about last year in world history. He believes in natural rights, and these are going to be things like life, liberty, and property. He says that these cannot be taken away, that every person is born with these rights, and that the purpose of the government is to protect those rights. And again, if the government is not protecting those, the people being governed have the right to actually overthrow the government and, kind of reconfigure it in whatever way necessary. Another idea is the consent of the governed. So this just means that the people in a specific area, let's say a country, are giving the government its power, right? So they're consenting to the government saying, yes, you may rule us in this way, shape, or form. Okay, but we essentially hold the power. We're giving you the power to govern us. Okay, and then that kind of stems to the idea of limited government. So in the United States today, we have a limited government. Our government is limited by a constitution. The Constitution tells the government what essentially they can and cannot do. So it limits the power of the government.
Basically, the government can't do whatever it wants,
right?
Which was what was happening in England with King George. Essentially, although with the Magna Carta and stuff like that, it really wasn't that bad.
There were some limitations put in place,
but there were a lot of absolute monarchies, even in France before the Revolution, like before the French Revolution. I mean, it was going down for real.
Going down for real.
Again, these are just some of the parallels between Locke and the Declaration of Independence that Thomas Jefferson wrote. I'm not really sure that you guys need to necessarily know this.
This is in your book, too, if you just want to take a quick peek at it.
Yeah, I think that's fine.
Yeah.
And you just know the parallels, know that Thomas Jefferson was a big fan of Locke, big fan of the Enlightenment, and this idea of natural rights, limited government, popular sovereignty, things like that.
And so he, as it kind of says here, he puts these ideas in the Declaration of Independence. So that right column, it's where Jefferson kind of got them, and then on the right column, he incorporates them into the Declaration.
It kind of looks like plagiarism there. Did he cite a source? I don't know that he did.
Did he put it in his own words?
I don't know. Life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness.
He
That's
did
pretty
change that.
close. He even used the P still. Like that's ridiculous, Thomas. Gosh. Would have gotten a 0 on the Declaration of Independence. Okay, anyway, back to work. So we talk a lot about the American principles, and you're going to see a lot of these kind of coming up throughout the year here. The first one is really individualism, and I always kind of associate individualism with kind of the right to to be free of excessive government intervention. We live our lives really without a lot of government intervention in our lives, and that goes back to the revolution. The government they felt anyway, government taxation and whatever was really just degrading their lives in some respects. It's kind of like a libertarian thought a little bit. I feel like. I mean, libertarians kind of take that and really run with it.
Free of government interference.
Right, exactly. And then so individualism is the first one. Rule by the people. Again, that idea of popular sovereignty is going to be very, very important. Again, we as Americans have the power in the government because we can vote people out when they are not doing what we want. The new ideas incubated in a unique environment. Again, this I feel like a lot of times you think about the revolution, there was really no ideas. Nobody had really done that before.
Nope.
And
Brand new.
even though it was a conservative revolution, like they thought that the colonies were a unique. It was kind of like an incubator for these ideas to kind of like really grow and prosper, leading to the eventual American Revolution.
And remember, before we come up with the big giant constitution, all of these different colonies and then states, they come up with their own kind of self-governing ideals, which then will be incorporated in the Constitution of the United States as we become one country.
Perfect. I think too, like another thing to remember is that this was a horrible process. Like
Ugh.
we almost lost in the first
Yeah.
year, and had Washington not like broken, like wartime rules, like we would have lost
He had to
essentially.
bring in Otto von Bismarck.
Well, he had to. I mean, I was
To
talking about the crossing the Delaware. Like he attacked on
yes,
Christmas Eve.
absolutely.
Broke
The rules a
yeah.
little bit there, but
But hey,
whatever. Gotta do what you gotta do.
Is that what you tell your softball kids? God. And then again, getting back to the conservative revolution, again, there was really no change that happened. Like the people who were in power before were still in power, like afterward. Meaning, like the people who were wealthy were still wealthy. People who were poor were still poor. The life as they knew it in the colonies really didn't change very much after the revolution, and that's why we call it a conservative revolution. In France, after their revolution, they called that a liberal revolution because a lot of people died. Like the kings, people were losing their heads, and just they were trying to enforce an entirely new set of principles that had never been done before. Whereas in America, things didn't really change very much.
Yeah.
Hey,
2.2.
Let's do it. Okay, Articles of Confederation.
Yes, let's do it.
So this is what we're going to talk about: articles, the changes in the states, and then economic turmoil.
Okay, so going back, kind of I already touched on this a little bit, but at the time we had state-dominated government. So it was described the colonies were described almost as a league of friendship, right? So we're all friends here. We have 13 colonies, all friends, but we really are all independently governed. Most states had what we would call, under the Articles, they had set up, so going back, the Continental Congress produced the Articles of Confederation, okay? And this was our the Second Continental Congress. This was our first governing document that kind of brought all of the colonies together under one governing body. Okay, they called it a League of Friendship. It created a unicameral legislature. Okay, unit meaning one. So there's just one house of lawmakers that are going to make policies for all the colonies. Okay, there was no judiciary, meaning there were no court systems. Okay, so there was nobody there to kind of check up on interpreting those policies that are being created. There was no executive, so there was no president. Okay, so there was nobody enforcing these rules or policies. The Articles did not set up a system to tax the American colonists, and those are for obvious reasons. They had just come from heavy taxes without getting represented, so they were very hesitant to incorporate anything that collected taxes from the colonies. And so what they did instead was said, the colonies are going to owe a certain amount of money to the federal government, and it'll be on kind of like an honor system basis.
I thought it was more like a donation system. It's kind of how I thought. It was like, hey, they'll, you can request money from them if they want, and they can give it to you if they want. Right.
And then Congress, or the unicameral legislature, really had no power to regulate commerce. So it got kind of bad because the different colonies maybe had different forms of money. They had their own currency. It was difficult to trade between colonies, et cetera, and Congress had really no way of regulating that stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And I think you really need, again, getting into the last point here, you really need to think they were so afraid of having a government that was like the British government, but at the end of the day, the British government was very successful. They had lasted for a very long time.
Right.
It was a limited monarchy, but they were so afraid of the government overreach. They were so afraid of a strong executive that they were just like, okay, well, we're just not going to have that. However, they created this excruciatingly weak government that just really couldn't get the job done.
And think about it, guys. I know, nobody wants to pay taxes, but tax money goes towards helping our government to function. And if you have no tax money coming in for a federal government to function, it is not going to last very long, right?
Well, it's like patriotic. It's,
Right.
I think that's how they looked at it. Like paying taxes is you're being loyal to your government, and like the idea of the government is that it can protect you. And if you set up a weak government, they're not going to be able to protect your rights. And that's really like what we're getting ahead of ourselves. But that's really what we're going to see.
Slide.
This is also in your
good.
book.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know that you necessarily need it because you have that in the previous. And the previous slide, a lot of it, I would probably add the national defense piece and the amendment piece would be the two things that I really would add. Again, they need any amendments to the articles required unanimous support, which meant that you'd have to get 13 people to agree on anything because they only had one vote, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, only had one vote. So that, again, it's impossible. And then also they could not raise and maintain an army and a navy. Again, they could. It's again kind of like a donations thing. Not really, but like people could send their militias. The states could send their militias, and then the articles, like the legislature could appoint somebody who was in charge of that new army, but they could not raise one themselves. So the changes in the state, you're going to see a lot of increases in liberty and democracy if you were a white male.
Of course.
Sorry, Ms. Womack, you wouldn't have been able to vote. For many, many years. Anyway, we're working on it. We're working on it. And again, that's the thing that we really don't ever talk about. And that's really the elephant in the room is that we talk about this awesome revolution. We talk about all men are created equal. However, women couldn't vote. Women were basically subjugated too, to be honest. And also the entire black race was being subjugated in America. So that's a whole other issue. We'll talk about that more in class. There was a new middle class, though, of white people. Again, artisans, farmers, and these people were making money on their own. And the elites, though, the Jeffersons, the Washingtons, they were starting to kind of feel threatened. Again, I don't know that you're probably going to see them start enacting policies to kind of make sure they maintain that power.
Sure.
We'll talk about that more later. And again, the legislature held all the power. So this was the legislatures of the states.
Mm-hmm.
They were the ones that were the true power. Again, even the states didn't want to have strong executives. So the governors were really just kind of puppets back then.
Okay, so after the war, we kind of see an economic turmoil. Wars cost a lot of money. And since we had a very weak central government, things kind of started just falling apart. One major event, and this is huge, that kind of leads us to getting rid of the Articles of Confederation, is something called Shays' Rebellion. And this happens in 1786. And this was a group of farmers in essentially New England, Massachusetts area.
Pennsylvania, I want to say?
Pennsylvania, New England,
New England area.
Somewhere up there.
Northeast.
And it's a group of farmers who mostly were veterans of the American Revolution. So they fought for the colonies in the Revolution. They essentially get back home and they have no money. They are about to lose their farms, right? They're about to get foreclosed on. And so what they do is kind of organize and they start a protest. It was kind of a rebellion. And they show up at a courthouse and they're, and the government, the central government, the federal government at the time realizes we have no way to even quell this rebellion. We don't have a standing army. We don't have money to pay anyone to be in a standing army. So eventually the rebellion gets put down by private citizens, essentially, probably paying people to help put it down. But what this kind of leads to is that central government going, okay, we need to take a deeper look at the articles, and maybe we need to kind of come together, get some delegates together, either fix it, or maybe we need to start new. So that kind of leads us what now will be the road to the Constitution.
Love it. All right, here we go. Constitution. I'm not exactly really worried about you guys knowing exactly who was there, except you should know that they were all wealthy white men.
Yeah.
Again, so you're going to get 55 delegates from 12 states, wealthy planters, lawyers, merchants. There were, I don't know, the idea was the articles were not protecting basic rights. So we talk about like the idea of human nature, political conflict, purpose of government, nature of government, and where they're trying to, eventually they realize the articles are not really salvageable, and we need to do more to make that change and to allow for our government to really protect our rights. But again, remember that we're talking about wealthy white men. They want to protect
so
their
protecting
interests,
their own interests,
because the government can't really do that for them. And we'll talk about that more throughout the year. Oh wow!
Oh wow, that was quick.
Oh okay. That's okay.
Right. Here we go.
All right, let's do it. Hey, look at that. It was our we did chat like 2.3 in 1 minute. Okay, great job.
So in this section, then these are the three things we'll go through: equality issues, economic issues, and individual rights. Okay, so the issue of equality. So once the delegates kind of sit down and start thinking about it, they say, okay, we're going to throw away the articles. Let's start fresh with a new document. One of the biggest things that they get to conflict. And what happens is they have to decide how are states going to be represented in our national legislature, okay? So they say, they're wondering, do states get one vote? Do states get several votes? Do they get votes according to that state's population? So what emerges is these two representation plans. The first one is called the New Jersey plan, and this one is going to kind of support or favor smaller populated states. New Jersey was a small populated state at the time, and essentially under the New Jersey plan, the delegates say, let's have equal representation. So let's have every state get one vote in the legislature. That way everybody's equal. No one has more say over anybody else. Well, the delegates from Virginia are going, well, we have a really high population and we think we should have a little bit more say than New Jersey. So why don't we set up something that is based on population? So according to a state's population, that's how many votes they get in Congress. And so what emerges then is kind of a compromise between those two plans. We call it the Connecticut Compromise. We also call it the Great Compromise. You will see it in both forms, so you do need to know both of those names for it. So what happens is they say, let's set up a bicameral legislature. Let's set up two houses. Let's have the first house, the upper house, the Senate, be equal representation. So every state gets 2 senators to represent them. The lower house, the House of Representatives, is going to be based on that state's population. So if you have more people in the state, that state will have more delegates in the national legislature. Okay? Makes sense. And then those houses will have to work together to create policies for the country. Well, then that brings up another snag. How do we count the slave population in the country? Because think about it, Virginia is going to have so many more slaves than, say, New Jersey. So that ends up being another compromise. And do we get to that here, or is that next?
I'm not sure, but I think it. I don't know that it's here. The South, though, you have to remember that they only white men are voting right now, and the population of white males in southern states is significantly lower than the population in the northern states. And again, that goes back to just the differences between the North and the South. The North is more is more urban, whereas the South is more agrarian, more farm, stuff like that. And so the Southern whites, they did not want, they wanted to count their slaves because they knew that was going to grant them more power in the legislature. And one more thing on the legislature is the idea that the legislature is the most powerful body in the government. They are the ones that make laws. They have the most that they can do, out of any branch of government. So that's why they fought so hard here. Did you want to go ahead? I'm sorry, I kind of stole that one from you. Do you want to go ahead and do the slavery part?
Sure. So the compromise that they came up with eventually during the convention was called the 3/5 compromise. Mm-hmm. And essentially what they decided on was for every 5 slaves counted in that state's population, it would count towards 3 people. Okay? So that is kind of a middle ground for those Southern delegates who wanted more representation in the legislature, and it would eventually get them, more delegates but it's the important part here is that it's another compromise. These guys have to sit down and really work it out. However, you think equality, you think no slavery at all, but we're not there yet. We're not quite there yet.
Well, and you just talk about you're talking about population issues. Like we're talking about women, slaves. But those people are being counted now towards the state's population. However, they have no ability to vote.
They have no say in
Correct.
Anything.
Right. And
but they're being counted in the population of that state.
Right, and they're second and third class citizens. So
right.
I mean, there's a lot of issues here that we need to be well aware of, because these issues are going to really set up American history for the rest of our time together. Mm-hmm. Like, we're still feeling the effects of these decisions, to be 100% honest with you. And the other thing about slavery mm-hmm. was, so they did the Three-Fifths Compromise, but also this one is like right here where it says, should slavery be abolished? They decided no, and so Congress was permitted to stop the importation of slaves after 1808.
They essentially gave themselves 20 years. Right.
So they gave themselves about 20 years of continued slave trade. And then after 1808, they would be able to stop the slave trade. However, I don't know that actually happened.
No.
Also, states were required to return runaway slaves from other states. Again, remember, slaves at this time are considered property. And you have the life, liberty, property, unless you're black. So those are the two issues with slavery. And then the last part that is talking about the equality in voting.
I like that, because that's still how we have it today.
It is. So the states are going to be able to decide the qualifications. So that has actually changed a little bit now since throughout American history, but states were the ones that they still, like in Missouri, for example, you have to have an ID now, and that's not common that's not true in every state. Mm-hmm. But Missouri decided that that's what they wanted to do, and that's what they do.
Mm-hmm. States still have control of their own elections.
Yep.
States are tasked with setting up their elections. It's not the federal government, it's individual states. So voting rules and regulations are different in every state, and that was kind of set up back when they created the Constitution.
Back in the day.
Okay.
So getting into the economic issues, I wanted to say this back with Shays Rebellion. Nobody likes taxes, like Ms. Womack said. However, if you don't pay your taxes, and nobody pays their taxes, and the government can't tax you, the government cannot provide you with anything. So, even just like veterans, if everybody in America right now stopped paying their taxes, America wouldn't be able to pay its military, military members. It wouldn't be able to take care of its veterans, definitely, which is exactly what happened in the Shays Rebellion. They were guaranteed money. They were they basically fought for free during the Revolution, and they said, we will pay you later. IOU, and they never could. They couldn't.
Which is why the farmers were losing their farms.
Right, and it was just the banks that were coming and taking their farms away. But and that was just the reason why there was so much anger on Daniel Shay's part and a lot of other people that were in the same boat as him. There was a lot of the problems. Other problems in the articles is that the states were treating each other like different countries, kind of. They would allow interstate tariffs. So a tariff is a tax on imported goods. So if you got something from Georgia to South Carolina, they would make you pay a tax on it, which is ridiculous. Okay, because you're not gonna. Again, it's just going to cause so many other problems considering we're in the same country. Tariffs are supposed to happen from outside countries, but that was the only way for the government to make money was tariffs. Anyway. Also, there was worthless paper money. They had greenbacks, but they couldn't buy anything. And as we stated earlier, Congress couldn't raise any revenue because they couldn't tax. In the new Congress, after the Constitution is written, Congress is given economic power, and they were allowed to limit the economic interference of states. The Commerce Clause is so important. It's really straightforward.
Huge.
I feel like it's really straightforward, but kind of confusing. You don't really get it. Anything that's happening between states like where money is changing hands, the federal government now has the ability to regulate that, and that's going to become very important in the coming years. And we have a debt now of $54 million,
which is a lot.
Which is a lot back then. Like that's like it doesn't sound like a lot now because we have like 21 trillion, but now, like back then, like that might as well have been 21 trillion.
Crippling debt. New powers of
okay,
Congress.
Great. So again, these are the powers of Congress. I would probably know these.
Yeah,
I would know at least most of them. Definitely punish piracy. Gotta have that.
Pirates.
That's my favorite one. Yeah, levying taxes. Or Napster. They're too young for Napster.
Yeah.
Okay. Anyway, pay again. They can pay debts. They can borrow money, coin money, and regulate its value. Again, so now there's only going to be one currency. I mentioned the regulating interstate and foreign commerce.
Bankruptcy laws.
Ooh, that's not bad.
Yeah.
Okay. And then also post offices and roads, protecting copyrights, all kinds of good stuff. One of three. There's more.
They could not.
So go ahead. I'm talking
coin
too
money or
much. I'm so
issue
sorry.
paper money. So this is what the states were prohibited from doing. So they could not create their own currency or issue their own paper money. They could not tax imports or exports from abroad or from other states. So no longer, if I'm living in New York, do I have to pay a tax on something I purchased from Georgia? Makes sense. They cannot pass laws impairing the obligations of contracts. They could not require payments of debts in paper money. The states were supposed to respect civil court judgments and contracts made in other states, which is something called the full faith and credit clause.
We'll get to that in a second.
Okay. And
chapter 3.
they were also supposed to return runaway slaves from other states, which we already kind of covered. Okay, other key provisions, the new government assumed the debt contracted under the Articles. So when we established the new government of the United States under the Constitution, they just acquired all that debt that we had before. And a Republican form of government was guaranteed, meaning we will vote for people to represent us at a bigger, larger scale. Okay, so representative Republican form of government.
You guys are going to get really confused with that because there's going to be a lot of times, again, the parties today call themselves the Democrats and the Republicans, but those words mean other things in this class. So just keep that in mind. Make sure you are just kind of staying up with that. So a Republican form of government means we vote for people who represent us in government. As opposed to what's called direct democracy, where everybody would participate in government, which can't be done on such a large scale. Individual rights issues. So these are really interesting, and this is really actually very applicable to you.
Mm-hmm.
We wanted to, I wasn't there. The founders wanted to preserve individual rights. We wanted to make sure that their rights were protected. So the first thing you need to know is habeas corpus. Okay, that is where habeas corpus is where you can suspend the right to a hearing to hear why you are or what you're charged with. Lincoln did this in the Civil War. He suspended habeas corpus in Maryland and just started throwing secessionists in jail. Okay, because it was a national emergency. Although some people thought that was like a huge abuse of power,
they thought he really
which it
overstepped on that one.
A bill of attainder. I always forget this one.
I know.
Bill of attainder is when. Hang on, I got this.
Okay.
I think bill of attainder.
It's when. Google.
Okay, hang on.
Go on.
Ex post
back.
facto.
We'll
I can do ex post facto because
Yeah.
I know that one. So ex post facto is that you cannot be charged for a crime if you committed the act before it was a crime. So like say they outlawed cell phones tomorrow, and then there's a picture of me with a cell phone like the day before, and then I got arrested. Okay, that would be called an ex post facto law, and that is prohibited in the Constitution. Go.
Okay, bills of attainder is let's say you're charged with something and put in jail without even going through a trial.
Oh, okay. So you're charged and punished without being given a proper trial.
Right, which is different from habeas corpus. Because
Yeah.
you're just being held.
Right. Habeas corpus is being held. A bill of attainder would just charge you
You're
without.
charged.
Like you're not.
And you're going to jail.
Right. Going down.
Go down.
Okay. The religious qualifications for office
I
are
can't-
prohibited.
Can I be honest? I didn't even know that there were.
I think that in some states there probably were.
Okay.
Like if you think about like the Quakers or Puritans
Makes sense.
So again, we'll talk a lot about a separation of church and state, and how kind of that line is being blurred today, which is really interesting. So we'll talk a lot about that.
I love it. Next unit.
And then there's also strict rules for what constitutes treason, which is also interesting when we talk about impeachment and things like that. Who knows what the future holds? Yeah. And then a right to a trial by jury, which will come across in the 6th and 7th Amendments of the Constitution, which will be, again, it's very basic rights that we enjoy today. Okay, that's all for this video. 35 minutes.
Woo!
You're welcome. Hey, guys, see you in the next one.
Yep.
Take it easy.